Season 34 is about to start, and as always, there is going to be a significant difference between this season and the last. It might be an aggro versus combo season, though we did not get Vampiric Tutor. But we're going to have Hardened Scales and Aristocrats both getting better, and we're going to have some Dark Ritual combo decks. White Weenie decks are probably going to stop existing, as well as the Azorius versions, Soldiers. Orzhov is probably dying as well. So Humans is kind of just dead. White aggro is still possible, but it's not going to have Champion of the Pair, so it's going to be a lot worse. Boros Legends is also dying because it needs Flowering, which is also leaving. Path leaving is bad for any white deck, including aggro. We're also losing the Glimpse Discover cards. So Glimpse is not really going to be possible. We do have Cascades, but we've had those in the past and it's never really been good. We have Tithing Blade leaving, which means that Yorion piles are going to get a lot worse. It means that they're probably not going to play Orzhov. If they exist, they're probably going to be Azorius or some other color combination. Dam is also bad for any Orzhov deck, but we're losing Orzhov anyway since it needs Tithing Blade. We're also losing Field of the Dead. We had Price of Progress in Season 33 and the next season, but it could have been interesting maybe. Braid is leaving, which makes red sideboards worse. Abrupt Decay leaving means the Rock is getting worse, but it was probably dead anyway. We are getting a very similar card in Assassin's Trophy. SRAM leaving means that Boros Auras gets a lot worse, although it's still possible with Core Spirit Dancer, though the 500 winning deck will probably be a lot worse next season. Deep Cavern Bat is leaving, which was the best version of that effect, but we still have Mesmeric Fiend, so it's not like we're losing the only kind of creature Thoughtseize. Insidious Roots is leaving, so no Insidious Roots Hogak decks. We are keeping Hogak, and it probably will see play in other places such as Hermit Druid, but no Insidious Roots. Haughty Djinn is leaving, which is unfortunate because it never really got a chance to see Mana Leak or Memory Lapse. It did have some things it could do with like Izzet and Dimir, but it's not going to get the chance to pair with Mana Leak. Deduce is leaving, which makes any control deck worse at generating card advantage, but Dimir does have Sauron's Ransom. Out of Air is leaving, which makes the second counterspell for control decks a lot worse. It's unclear if they have any other good 2-mana counter. It's mostly just Quenches. No More Lies is leaving, but we do have Mana Leak in this season. So it's really just a No More Lies that more decks can play. Crypt of Agadim is leaving. Not that it was really played in many decks anyway. At least this season. These are all cards that are returning for Season 34 that were not legal in Season 33. Defense Grid will be a big upgrade for combo decks. It will make them a lot more resilient to counter magic, and they can also play it as an answer to Orm's Chant. It was unclear if that will be a good play. Storm is going to be pretty good with Dark Ritual, Mind's Desire, and Frantic Search, though it does kind of struggle with actually making mana. We do have Sapphire Medallion, so you do kind of need Dark Ritual or the Sapphire to make mana. Malcolm is getting in, which could be interesting in tempo decks, control decks, combo decks. Could be played in Twin. Basically, a lot of random blue piles will play it most likely. And we are getting Twin in Kiki-Jiki and Pester Might. It's unclear if this will actually be as good as last time, because it probably is going to be a worse color combination. Because Izzet is not really the best blue color combination anymore, and we're losing, or we don't have Memory Lapse like we did in Season 32. Though we do have Mana Leak. Chain Lightning being in makes any red deck better, especially aggro such as Aristocrats. Dennick being in is good for Azorius Control and maybe Azorius Tempo-ish decks, though it's probably not that impactful. Rofellos makes Mono Green Ramp a lot better with a new card from Modern Horizons 3. Hermit Druid could be its own deck, but we don't have Dread Return, which we had in the previous season, so it's going to have to jump through some hoops. Eureka is getting in for the first time in a long time. It does have Hypergenesis plus Shardless Agent, so it could be an 8 of. And we also have Boseiju, who shelters all, which means that you can make it uncounterable, which makes it kind of impossible to interact with. Though there is discard, there is extractions. Kind of. Extractions don't necessarily work because if you're playing Eureka and Shardless Agent plus Hypergenesis, you can't just extract one of them. So it is pretty resilient to hate. We're getting Nightlock Scavenger for mid-range decks. Duress for any black deck really helps combo and hurts them. It makes black better against combo, makes black combo decks better. Dark Ritual is probably going to fuel a lot of combo decks, the most obvious one being Storm. It's kind of hard to say what else it will be played in, but there will probably be something. Priest of Forgotten Gods means that Aristocrats gets slightly better, though we are losing Bob. It's probably just a slightly better replacement. Mana Leak makes blue a lot better. Makes Gnomerlies accessible for any color combination, essentially. Meddling Mage makes Azorius Tempo decks potentially good, though those might not exist anyway. It could be good in hero decks with General Ferris, most likely in Jeskai. We're also getting Zabaz, which makes Hardened Scales a lot better. It's losing basically nothing despite being an okay deck last season, and it's gaining Zabaz and the new Ozolith. So I think it will be one of the best aggro decks in the next season. We are getting the same Enchantress deck from Season 32 pretty much, with Sanctum Weaver and Scythus, which might be good this season, though it kind of just depends what the meta looks like. Lotus Bloom is currently unconfirmed as I'm recording this. It would be interesting in combo decks probably. Could make eggs possible, though it's hard to say what it actually does. It does make Tameshi Bloom possible, though it's hard to say if that's actually a good strategy in the coming season. Adeline could make white aggro decks remain good, despite losing Champion of the Parish. Though it's hard to say if that's actually enough, especially since you can't play Lurrus if you play Adeline. We're also getting some fairy things in Bitter Blossom and Vendilion Click, which are a little bit power crept, but Bitter Blossom is still a decent card. Though it's hard to say if you actually want to play it in a control deck, or a tempo deck, or a random black mid-range deck. Vendilion Click could go with Bitter Blossom, because we do have a land that is untapped if you reveal a fairy from hand. Dimir land. So it could be interesting with those. In some kind of fairy tribal deck. We also have Sapphire Medallion, which makes combo decks actually able to make mana with Frantic Search and potentially Turnabout. Makes them able to be mono blue with extra planar lens, essentially being a tideless tide deck. Or they could just be Dimir with Dark Ritual plus Sapphire Medallion as their ways of making mana. Assassin's Trophy, it's hard to say if any decks will be in Golgari, but any Golgari deck probably wants this. Blast Zone for potentially Cloudpost decks. It's good against Hardened Scales. It's good against random aggro decks as well. And then we have Vesuva, which makes any Cloudpost deck a lot better, though we don't have Glimmer Post. And we don't really have ways of finding lands. We don't have Expedition Map or Sylvan Scrying, so it's going to be hard to find the Cloudpost. So it's hard to say if that will actually be viable. And you could ramp into the new Kozileks if you do try to play Cloudposts. Those are also targets for Reenact the Crime, which could be good with Frantic Search, Sapphire Medallion this season, Malcolm. We also have Fanatic of Vronis, which is like the Raphelos. It's good in mono green ramp decks. You could potentially play the Palu Kranos from one of the recent Phyrexian sets, 3 mana 4/5, to enable the Ferocious. Basically, this just makes a lot of mana like Raphelos, so you can have more redundancy. Torrential Gearhulk and Shadow of the Second Sun, also new this season, and good control win cons potentially, though they are both a little bit questionable. Torrential Gearhulk might be weaker than the current win cons like Dream Trawler, though it could be better in other color combinations. It casts Dig Through Time, and it casts counter spells. Shadow of the Second Sun is like a Wilderness Reclamation that also draws a card, which could be interesting, maybe a sideboard card. Nicol Bolas, it's good if you're in Grixis, but Grixis is probably not going to be very good, and it's not really that much of an upgrade. Case of the Ransack Lab could be really good in Storm decks, as it essentially is a Sapphire Medallion that also draws a card whenever you cast a spell, which makes you not have to have a Mind's Desire. Though you do have to solve it first, which means that you have to play this on turn 3, solve it on turn 4, and win on turn 5, which is a little slow. But you can actually play Born Upon a Wind, which gives all your spells flash to go off in your end step after solving it on turn 4. Elspeth is potentially the best 6-mana walker, though it could be worse than the Eternal Wanderer. It's hard to say which is actually better. They cost the same much. They're the same mana cost. Elspeth is better on an empty board and actually has an ultimate, unlike the Eternal Wanderer, so it's more threatening, but it's hard to say if the Wrath is actually better than destroying all creatures except one of your opponents. It really depends on how many creatures have power 4 or greater. Satya Aetherflux Genius could be really good for Jeskai General Ferris decks. It's only one more color than General Ferris requires, and you probably want to be 3 color anyway. We have some lands that let you play an actual humans deck. And basically this card is really good if you have enters the battlefield creatures. The only problem is it's hard to cast, so it's probably only played in exactly General Ferris decks. Brutal Cathar potentially played in any aggro or mid-range white deck that does not want Lurrus, which might be none of them. Phyrexian Vindicator, it's unlikely that white aggro actually wants this if they're playing Adeline, but it could be good there. Probably doesn't really do anything else because white mid-range, like you can't play mono white mid-range really, and mono white control probably doesn't want this. Detective's Phoenix could be good for any red aggro deck, especially red deck wins. Basically if you can ever cast it from the graveyard for the bestow cost, it's really good, but if you can't, it's bad. Blightsteel Colossus, one of the best things to cheat out this season, though you can't reanimate it. And you can't hit it with the Reenact the Crime. We still have Iona as the competition for that. And the new Kozilek if you're casting the card. Some more new cards this season are Tezzeret, which is good for any artifact mid-range deck and potentially makes them good, but it isn't really going to do anything in decks outside of that. Cranial Ram and Kappa Cannoneer for any affinity decks. They can play pretty much any number of colors since we have Glimmer Void and Spire of Industry, 2 rainbow lands for artifact decks. Though it's hard to say if we actually have the artifacts to fuel these. We have no artifact lands. Hardened Scales looks to be one of the best aggro decks this season because it's basically staying the same and getting Zabaz plus the new Ozolith, which is essentially just another Hardened Scales, but for 2 mana. Profane Tutor could be interesting for black combo decks. Probably not Storm, because it can't be played on the combo turn, but anything else. It's potentially the best tutor. We do have Wishclaw Talisman, so it competes with that for other combo decks. Resplendent Angel is potentially interesting with life gain, though it's hard to say how you're actually gaining that life. We do have Giada, Font of Hope, as well for Angel Tribal, though it's hard to say if you can actually gain that much life in Angel Tribal, or if you would even want to play Angel Tribal. Phyrexian Obliterator for mono black midrange, potentially. It's hard to say if this card is actually good enough, but it is interesting. Kadak T for any Selesnya deck, most likely the sideboard of Hardened Scales. It stops Mind's Desire from being cast. Basically, it stops Wraths, it stops Storm from actually going off until they answer it. So interesting against both combo and control for Scales or any other Selesnya midrange or aggro deck. So I think that Hardened Scales and Aristocrats will be the best aggro decks. I think all of these decks are like obviously going to be something this season. Of course, there are going to be a lot of potentially good decks that I didn't cover here. Potentially ones that have never been played before, potentially returning archetypes. There are probably going to be a lot of viable decks. But I think that the most obvious ones are Hardened Scales, Aristocrats, Dimir Storm, or Mono Blue. Probably Dimir though, because of Dark Ritual. Izzet Twin, like in Season 32. Enchantress, like in Season 32, and some kind of Rofellos, Fanatic of Rhonas deck. Right, that is my Season 34 hype list, essentially. I think that this season will be interesting. It is a lot shorter than the current season. It's a little over 2 months, I believe, and the last one was almost 4 months. So it is a lot shorter. It'll be interesting to see. I personally am excited for Storm to be good, potentially. But it's an interesting season. We do have some of the same, some from Season 32 especially. It's a lot of last season and the season before stuff, but we do have new stuff like Storm and Ramp that were from even older seasons. None of these decks are actually new decks. They're all from some season, either the last 2 seasons or from before Season 30. Though I'm sure something else will be discovered.